pocket billiards actually originated, and most believe, modern pocket billiards, in the 16th century, actually about 1560. Now, the first pocket billiards in this country was brought over by the Spaniards. So we have the Spanish people to thank for pocket billiards being brought to the United States. And it started in a little town called St. Augustine, Florida. Then, as time went by, it progressed northward, later on westward. But ladies and gentlemen, the first pocket billiards matches in the United States of America were played in the middle to latter part of the 1800s. Pocket billiards now has jumped from 6th place in participant sports to 2nd place. It's right behind bowling. Between 30 and 40 million Americans now shoot pool. You know, ladies and gentlemen, the next lesson is the tools of the trade lesson. When anyone wishes to excel at any sport, one must have the correct tools. It's not all unlike any other profession, such as dentistry, physician, carpenter, electrician, what have you. Proper tools are mandatory. A physician needs a good scalpel. A dentist needs a good drill. A carpenter needs good saws and hammers, and so forth. Now, one of those tools of the trade is the cue itself. There are many good cues on the market today. This particular cue is called a balabushka cue. Mr. Balabushka was a master at cue making. However, he is deceased now, and these cues can no longer be purchased. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are various parts of the cue, and it's very pertinent that you know the individual parts. The part up here, the leather part, is called the tip of the cue. I would suggest that you purchase a hard leather. This particular tip is called a Le Professionnel, or shortened to Le Pro. It's an excellent tip. The part below the tip is called the ferrule, F-E-R-R-U-L-E. They're usually made out of implex materials or of ivory. The part from the ferrule to the middle of the cue is called the shaft. And I would recommend, ladies and gentlemen, that you purchase a cue that is made of hard rock Canadian maple. Sometimes it's called northern maple. It will not warp on you, such as woods like ramin wood, R-A-M-I-N. These woods are made in Taiwan, and they will warp. So get one made out of hard rock maple. The center of the cue, this is called the joint. Joints are made out of various materials. This particular material is stainless steel. They are also made of implex materials and brass. I would suggest that you get either an implex or stainless steel. Now, the back of the cue, from the joint to the other end, this is called the butt of the cue. The part above the black part here, up to here, is called the wrap. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are many types of wraps on the market. There is a cork wrap, there's a nylon wrap, there's a leather wrap, and an Irish linen. Most professionals prefer Irish linen because it will absorb the perspiration in the hand. The butt end of the cue, ladies and gentlemen, frankly, is not as important as the shaft. They use various woods to make the butt. And this really is where your expense comes in for your more expensive cues. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's also important that you learn the proper maintenance of the cue. Never leave your cue sitting against the wall. If you have a two-piece cue like this one, you will need to take it apart each evening and lay it down flat. One further word, ladies and gentlemen, about choosing a cue. Always choose a cue with a 13 millimeter shaft. At least that's my recommendation. They make cues 12 millimeters, 12 and a half, clear up to 14 millimeters. But the average professional uses a 13 millimeter shaft. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you will also need to purchase a little tip tapper. This looks similar to a file. And if you use a hard leather tip, which I recommend, many times when you shoot a lot of shots, that tip will become shiny or slick. So by using a tip tapper, all you do then is to tap the leather like this. And it leaves little indentations in the leather, and that causes it to, the chalk to adhere to the leather, as you can see. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is also a right way and a wrong way to chalk the tip of the cue. Many times you will see a player, a beginning player, that will grind the tip into the chalk like this. That is incorrect. What you do is take the chalk and start at one end and go over the cue, twisting the cue like such. Go over the top of the cue from the center over the side. And you actually only need 2 or 3 swipes of chalk over the leather tip. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you're sanding from the middle of the leather over the side and turning the cue as you sand, you will need to know how round your tip should be. The way you determine that is by taking a coin, a nickel, and putting up behind the tip itself. And when you have sanded that tip until the leather is has the same curve as the nickel, then you will have a perfectly rounded tip. Now, ladies and gentlemen, next is your stance lesson. It is extremely pertinent that you learn to stand at the table correctly. Many times you will see players standing this way at the table, or perhaps this way. Both of those methods are incorrect because your feet should be directly under your shoulders. You should approach the cue ball at a 45-degree angle, similar to shooting a rifle. You would not shoot at the cue ball like this. You would shoot at a 45-degree angle. Then you simply bend at the waist. This causes your front knee to bend and your back knee to stay straight. So this is your correct stance at the table. Next, ladies and gentlemen, is your bridge lesson. You know, one of the first things that a new player or a beginning player needs to learn is how to hold the cue. Many times you are going to see players holding the cue like this. That is incorrect, ladies and gentlemen, because the bridge is open at the top. Consequently, the cue can slip either from one side to the other. So you want to use what is called a closed bridge. Now, all you do to make a closed bridge is simply make a fist like this. Then you make a V like this, You put the shaft in the V. Do not touch your fingertips together because the cue can still slip from side to side. Place the forefinger down over first. Then place the bottom of your thumb on the side of your forefinger, pushing it into this middle knuckle, like this. And extend your 3 fingers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a correct bridge to use in most cases while shooting pool, you see. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are other types of bridges. Another type is what we call the rail bridge. There are various times when you will need to use this bridge. For instance, the cue ball is close to a cushion. You do not have room here to place your hand down. So you need to come back on the rail. Many players form an incorrect bridge where they place their hand on top of the bridge. But the palm of your hand needs to be on the table itself. So what you do is simply move this thumb on the other side of the shaft of the cue, forming a little slot there. Put the forefinger over the cue, pulling it into the little slot formed with these 2 fingers, you see, like this. So this is a correct rail bridge. Now, ladies and gentlemen, always make sure that you keep the palm of your hand down on the table as many times as you can. Do not lift the palm off of the table if you can keep from it. However, there are many times that you cannot keep from it. So, when you have to lift the butt of your hand off of the table, be sure you press down on the table very hard. You can see the blood coming to the ends of my fingers. I'm pushing down so hard. Otherwise, your hand will slip, you see. Now, there is another way to keep your hand from slipping, giving it more stability, is by taking this ring finger and making a tripod out of these 3 fingers. That gives you stability underneath the palm of your hand, you see. There is another type of bridge when the cue ball is closer to the cushion. I don't have room to lay my hand down on the cushion, you see, so I need to bring it on back this way. So you take this middle finger and place it right here, forming a regular bridge, using the ring finger as a slot, and place your forefinger over, pulling it down close to your ring finger, like this, you see. You always want to keep your cue as level with the table as you can. Do not raise the butt of your cue up. Keep it level with the table as much as possible. There's another type of bridge when the cue ball is close to the other cushion, here. And what you do is place the palm of your hand on the cushion itself, and you form a regular bridge, like this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you want to draw a ball back, you must hit it below center. Consequently, if you have a regular bridge, this middle finger is in the way, and you would have to raise the butt of your cue up to hit it low. All you do is simply remove the middle finger from underneath the shaft and place it underneath your palm. Now the cue can be brought down like this, you see, without raising the butt of the cue. A follow stroke is when you hit the cue ball above center. So all you do is move your 3 fingers in toward your body like this. And it brings the tip of the shaft up on the cue ball. You can either flatten it out like this, or bring it up and then in like this. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I mentioned, it is never good to use an open bridge. However, there are many times when one has to use an open bridge. And one of those is if you were in a position such as this. I must shoot over the one ball to hit another ball at the other end of the table. I do not have room to make a regular bridge because of this ball. So I must use an open type of bridge. In other words, I need to bring the butt of my hand up off of the table, forming a V with my thumb and forefinger, you see. Once again, make certain that you are pushing down on the table very hard. Here again, you can see the blood at the end of my finger, just like this. That way, you will miss the one ball, of course, and hit the cue ball without touching the one. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are other types of bridges that one must learn. Many times, you must make the cue ball curve. These are called massé strokes. There are two types of massés. One of those is what we call a freehand massé. And the way you make that particular bridge, you make a fist and put the shaft in the V again. You have to bring the butt of your cue almost perpendicular with the floor, and you hold it in to the side of your stomach like this. And that will keep your arm very, very steady, where then you can come down on the cue ball in this manner. Now, at other times, ladies and gentlemen, you will have no need for a freehand massé. And that is when the cue ball is farther from the cushion, like this. That allows you to make the second type of massé bridge. And all you do is simply make your V again between your thumb and your forefinger, press hard on the table, but turn your wrist away from you like this. And that will create your V, allowing you to raise the butt of your cue and to come down on the ball at whichever place you wish. Now next, ladies and gentlemen, is your grip lesson. You know, in order to shoot pool proficiently, you must learn how to hold the cue at the butt end. Many players hold the cue away back at the extreme end of the cue. This is incorrect, ladies and gentlemen, because when I draw the cue ball or the cue tip back to shoot, my hand is as far back as it can go. So to get the tip all the way back to my forefinger, my arm has to start coming up like this. Consequently, it gives the cue what we call the rocking chair action. In order to shoot good pool, you must keep the cue level with the table. Consequently, you will need to hold the cue in this manner. Find your balance point on this particular cue. It's about right here, you see. This is your balance point. Now hold the cue about 3 or 4 inches back from the balance point. If you're a taller person, of course, you'll need to hold it back 2 or 3 inches further. But an average height person, hold it about 3 or 4 inches back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, only hold it with these 2 fingers. Let it rest lightly on 2 more fingers. You do not want the palm of your hand to touch the wrap. In other words, do not hold the cue tight like this. Otherwise, you will get the same rocking chair action as you get by holding the cue way back here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you will notice that as I stroke the cue, my palm is not touching the cue. However, when I complete my stroke and go through the cue ball like this, you will notice that the palm now has to touch the cue. So once again, hold your hand very loose back here and let it slide freely. And then when you go through, of course, your palm has to touch the cue. So your bridge hand, you hold very tight. Your grip hand, you hold very loose. That's the things to remember, and that's the things to practice on when learning to hold your cue correctly. You know, one way a player has to determine how good his opponent is by watching that opponent's stroke. Now, the stroke, ladies and gentlemen, is from the time you put your bridge hand down on the table until you completely follow through after hitting the cue ball. This is your stroke. Now, ladies and gentlemen, always keep your mind ahead of the cue ball. Consequently, if you want to shoot soft, your cue should only go through the cue ball about an inch or so. You see. Now, if you want a medium stroke, if you want to shoot the shot with a medium stroke, then your cue ball should go through, your cue tip should go through the cue ball about 3 or 4 inches. If, however, for some reason or another, you need to shoot hard, your tip will go through the cue ball about 6 to 8 inches. You see. So it's always determined by how far the tip of your cue goes through the cue ball itself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one must remember that the speed of one stroke causes the cue ball to rebound off of the object balls at different places. In other words, if one shoots easy, like this, I'm going to cue the cue ball above center. You will notice that the cue ball hits right here. Now, if I were to have the same shot and shot the shot with a medium stroke rather than a soft stroke, hitting the cue ball above center again, the cue ball hits here, a good 3 inches from the first place. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I were to stroke the cue ball with a hard stroke, hitting the cue ball in exactly the same place, you will notice now that the cue ball ends up here. Almost a diamond difference in the easy and the hard shot. So you must remember that, because the path of your cue ball, the path that your cue ball takes after it hits your object ball, is determined by how hard you shoot the shot. Now, ladies and gentlemen, on stroking the cue ball, when stroking the cue ball, your forearm should be parallel, I should say perpendicular, to the floor, when the tip of your cue is about 3 or 4 inches from the cue ball. You'll notice that my arm is relatively perpendicular with the floor. And that helps you to determine, once again, where to hold the cue back here. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, one way to practice one stroke is by utilizing a Coke bottle. And what you do is to take an empty Coke bottle and lay it flat on the table. You make an ordinary bridge, and you try to get the tip of the cue to go through the neck of the bottle without touching it. And when you can do this 8 to 10 times, you're finding out that your stroke is perfect. Another way to determine this is by getting at one end of the table and shooting to the other end of the table. Now, if your cue ball comes back and touches the tip like that, you have made a perfect stroke. If you have any English on the ball, in other words, if you hit the cue ball left or right of center, it will not come back and touch the tip. I'm giving the cue ball a little right English. So notice the cue ball comes back and goes to the right. If I were to have hit the cue ball with left English, it would have come back and gone to the left, you see. But as long as you stroke the cue ball dead center, it will come back then and hit the tip of your cue. So there are a couple of practice methods that you can use while practicing your stroke. Now, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you have read in many books that one should not cue the cue ball more than 1 Q-tip width from the center of the cue ball. That is true, ladies and gentlemen, only if you are learning beginning pool. Because as far as I know, there is not a professional alive that stays within that diameter. Many times you're going to get into difficult situations in which you have to cue the cue ball to the extreme right or to the extreme left. The only thing to remember, ladies and gentlemen, is that the cue tip itself must remain inside the diameter of the ball. But actually, you can cue the cue ball away out here and not miscue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are times when one has to shoot a shot and you can't reach all the way over the table because of short arms, perhaps. They make an instrument that is called the mechanical bridge. Sometimes it's nicknamed the rake. And there is a particular method that you must use to use this rake correctly. You lay it down on the table in this manner. Take your cue tip and put it in the little slot there. You want to turn your fingers over to the top of the cue. Now, there are 2 or 3 different types of grips. This is one of them. This is another. So whichever one feels comfortable to you is what you should use. Be very certain that you place this hand down and hold it very tightly to the table. Put your chin right over the cue and stroke as you would in any other stroke and shoot easy. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time now for your aiming lesson. You know, aiming the cue ball at the object ball is probably one of the most misunderstood aspects of learning to play pocket billiards. There are right and wrong ways to aim. One of the old methods of aiming was what we call the imaginary ball method. And the way that works, one would make an imaginary ball in their mind's eye that was directly in line with the ball they wanted to make. Just an imaginary ball. Now, what one tried to do was to aim the center of the cue ball toward the center of the imaginary ball, and supposedly the object ball would go in the pocket. The correct method is what we call the point of contact method. And I'll try to explain that to you. The contact point is a point, an imaginary line that goes from the center of the pocket through the center of the 7 ball in this case. So there would be your contact point on the object ball. But ladies and gentlemen, both balls are round. So if I were to aim the center of the cue ball toward that contact point, the 7 ball would miss away down here. I'm going to show you what I mean. You see, hits right here. So what you have to do is to imagine a circle being drawn on a piece of paper. Then you make your imaginary line running through the center of the 2 ball. And there it is. There's your contact point. Now, when you get over the cue ball, you can see that the contact point is approximately 1/2 inch from the left side of the circle, aiming over the cue ball. So all you need to do is mark a point 1/2 inch, the same distance, from the right side of the circle. And you aim this point at this point. This is one of the most important features of aiming. You must remember there's a difference between a contact point and an aiming point. Now, the way to figure the contact point is make an imaginary line that runs right through the center of the object ball to the center of the pocket. That's called the contact point. Now, you can see as we go over the cue ball itself that the contact point on the object ball is moving to the left about 1/4 inch. So that gives you your actual contact point about 1/4 inch from the left side of the center of the ball, you see. Now, you must mark off a point 1/4 inch on the left side of the object ball and mark off the same distance on the cue ball, about 1/4 inch in this case. And by the black line, you'll see that you must aim that point on the cue ball to the point on the object ball to make it go into the pocket. Now, you will notice that the contact point is from the center of the pocket through the center of the object ball. As we move to the left this time, the opposite direction, you'll see that contact point on the object ball going to the right, you see, as we move over the cue ball. So what you must do is aim, there's your contact point, a line right through the object ball, and you must aim the left side of your cue ball to the right side of the object ball. In other words, there is your contact point as you look over the cue ball. So we'll mark that out in red. We mark out an equal distance on the left side of the cue ball. We aim that point, as designated by the black line, to the point on the object ball, and of course the object ball will go into the pocket. Now, one could actually cut a ball up to 90 degrees. There's your imaginary line running through the center of the object ball, once again called your contact point. Now, at the angle shown, you can see that the contact point on the object ball and the cue ball is very thin, and you have to aim the edge of the left side of the cue ball to the edge of the right side of the object ball. And you can actually make a ball up to 90 degrees. And we're going to show you here on the computer graphics. There's your object ball. There's your 90-degree angle. If the cue ball is straight in, then you hit the center. Your contact point is in the center of the object ball, showing the two balls completely encircled in red. As we come to the left, you will notice that the contact point on both balls decreases. Your speed of stroke is going to determine where your object ball ends up as well as your cue ball. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's many more things that I could tell you about aiming, but that is primarily the main thing. This is what you want to practice over and over and over until you get both of those points of contact in your mind. Next, ladies and gentlemen, is your stop shot or center ball lesson. There comes many times in pool in which you need to make the cue ball stop dead in its tracks. And the way to do that is to hit the cue ball in the center. As long as the cue ball and the object ball are within 1 foot or 12 inches apart. Then you hit the cue ball in the center and the object ball will stop. Now, if you hit the cue ball easier, your cue ball actually will follow. So it's important that you stroke the ball a little bit harder on that shot. Now, if you're more than a foot away from the four ball, you will need to cue the cue ball slightly below center to get it to stop. And if you're farther yet, you'll need to cue the cue ball a little bit farther below center to get it to stop. So it all depends on your speed of stroke. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this shot you will need to practice over and over. Most professionals, rather than hitting the cue ball in the center, even though it is within 12 inches apart, most professionals hit it a little bit below center so that it will not follow when they shoot easy. You can practice both ways and see which suits you best, but I believe you'll find you'll be more accurate by hitting the cue ball a little bit below center and making it stop by the speed of your stroke. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we learned earlier, English means hitting the cue ball to the right or left of center. It also affects the path of the cue ball after it hits a cushion. And I'm going to demonstrate how the cue ball reacts with left English when it hits a cushion, and then with right English. Now, to give you a better understanding of those shots, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to use a specially prepared ball so that you will observe the ball turning as it rolls. If you cue the cue ball with left English and shoot hard, it actually squirts to the right. When you cue the cue ball with right English and shoot hard, it will actually squirt to the left. Now, ladies and gentlemen, English not only affects the roll of the cue ball, it affects the roll of the object ball that you hit. For example, if you shoot easy and hit the object ball with right English, it will curve slightly to the right. And once it hits the 7, it causes the 7 to curve only slightly to the left. But ladies and gentlemen, that is only when you shoot easy. When you cue the cue ball with right English and shoot hard, the opposite effect takes place. In other words, if I shoot the cue ball with right English and shoot hard, it will actually slip to the left before it hits the 7. I'm going to give you an example of how you have to compensate to make up for that slippage. If I wanted to make the 7 ball in this pocket, and I know I have to shoot hard, I cannot aim the 7 for the center of the pocket because it's going to miss over here. Because this cue ball is going to squirt to the left before it hits it. I have to aim to miss to allow for the slippage. So I'm going to aim the 7 ball to miss. And I'm going to hit it with right hand English, and let's see what happens. Even though I aimed the ball to miss, it still went in the pocket. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is called slippage. You must keep the squirt in mind. Practice it until you can determine exactly what we're talking about here. Because you must be able to compensate your aim on the object ball and allow for the squirt if you have to shoot hard. Now, ladies and gentlemen, your next lesson is your draw stroke lesson. A draw stroke is when you hit the ball below center, right in the middle. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that if professionals had only one shot to choose, it would be the draw stroke. It's probably the most important shot in pool. It's very, very important, ladies and gentlemen, that you learn not to fear the draw stroke because so many players are afraid of miscuing. But ladies and gentlemen, as long as you hold the cue level as possible at least, you're not going to miscue. I'm going to demonstrate a way that you can keep the cue level. If your fingers are rather chubby, then this middle finger is in the way. All you have to do to bring the cue lower is to remove that middle finger and put it underneath your palm. Now, your cue can be held much lower without having to raise the butt of the cue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the follow-through is very, very important. Follow right on through the cue ball after you hit it. The harder you hit the cue ball, the farther back the cue ball draws. To give you an example, if I hit the cue ball below center and hit easy, it will come back to about right here. However, if I shoot the cue ball harder, the cue ball will actually draw back to the cushion and on out the table. So that's what determines how far your cue ball draws back. Now, ladies and gentlemen, many times you're going to have a shot like this in 9-ball. You will have the 9-ball close to the pocket. I must hit the 2-ball first, of course, which is the smallest ball on the table. There is a system that you can use to draw the cue ball back to make the 9. And I'm going to try to explain that to you. You make an imaginary line that runs in between the cue ball and the 9-ball. This we call bisecting the angle. In other words, the cue ball must be the same distance on the right side of the cue as the 9 ball is on the left side of the cue. Now, wherever that line is pointing at the 2 ball here is where you want to aim the center of your cue ball. Do not aim to hit it. Aim the center of your cue ball here. It's actually going to hit right over here. So we're going to try to demonstrate that to you. I'm aiming the center of my cue stick toward that imaginary point that bisects the angle. And there we made the 9 ball in the pocket. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you'll need to practice the draw stroke over and over and over again because, as I said previously, it's probably the most important shot that you will learn. Now, ladies and gentlemen, by utilizing the red stripe cue ball, we're going to demonstrate the action of the cue ball when you hit the cue ball with a draw stroke. That is, you hit it below center. We're going to shoot the shot hard, medium, and soft. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the backspin remains on the cue ball much farther if you hit it hard. If you hit it medium, it remains on the cue ball to about halfway down the table and then starts forward. And if you hit it easy, it begins rolling forward about a foot or so from where you hit it. There are many times while you're playing pocket billiards that you need to cause the cue ball to follow after it's hit an object ball. The way you do that is to hit the cue ball above center. And as you will notice, the cue ball then follows the object ball. Now, how far the cue ball follows the object ball after you hit it depends on how hard you hit the cue ball. So if I were to shoot the same shot and shoot it harder, then the cue ball hits the cushion and follows away down here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is a way that you can make the 5 ball even when you're straight in and keep from scratching by cheating the pocket. Cheating the pocket means that instead of aiming the 5 ball to the center of the pocket, I would aim it slightly to the right or left of the pocket. That way, I can follow the ball and still not worry about scratching, you see. It's called cheating the pocket. Therefore, it's very, very important that you practice cheating the pocket. You're going to need it many times in pool. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there is a system that I would like to explain to you that you can use in 9-ball as well as many other games. Let's say that we have your 9-ball close to the pocket, and for some reason or another, I need to Carom off the 3 into the 9. The way you do that is to make an imaginary line that runs right through the center of the 3 and the 9. Now, where this line connects on the opposite side of the ball is where you want to aim the center of your cue ball. It's going to hit over here, of course, but you're aiming the center of your cue ball toward the opposite side of this ball where it connects to the 9. And of course, you must stroke the cue ball above center to get it to follow. Let's see if we can execute that shot for you. And that way, we just won a game of 9-ball. Now, ladies and gentlemen, practice your follow stroke as much or more than you do any other shot that you practice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to speak for a moment about what is termed the transfer of English. If you cue the cue ball on the left side, the cue ball is spinning counterclockwise. On the right side, just the opposite. Now, once it hits the object ball with left English, it puts right English on the object ball. If you hit your cue ball with left English, it puts right English on the object ball. I'm going to try to demonstrate that for you. As you will notice, it doesn't transfer a lot of English, but you can tell that it does transfer some. Now, we have other applications of that, and I'm going to go into another application. Now, ladies and gentlemen, another shot I would like to explain in the transfer of English portion of this lesson. If you cue the cue ball below center, it will put a backspin on the cue ball. Therefore, when the cue ball hits the object ball, it transfers the opposite way. It will put an overspin on the cue ball. Now, we have a game situation set up here to try to demonstrate that. Now, notice, if you will, I cannot come off the 1 ball to make the 9 because the 8's in the way. Most players that would have a situation like this would have no idea that the 9 ball can be made. I'm going to hit the cue ball slightly below center so that it puts a backspin on it. When it hits the 1 ball, the 1 knocks the 3 out of the way. The backspin on the cue ball puts forward spin on the 1 ball. So we're going to try to demonstrate this in a game situation. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is simply another version of the last shot. In a case like this, one might wonder the best way to make the 1 ball go in after the 8. Many players are going to hit the cue ball above center to try to get it to follow and kick the 1 in. But that is not the correct way. You need to hit the cue ball below center to throw the 1 ball forward. So we're going to try to demonstrate that for you. In pocket billiards, there is a shot called a carom shot. The word actually comes from another game, carom billiards. That is a game in which you use a table with no pockets. Now, the application of the shot is when you cause the cue ball to go from 1 ball into another. I'm going to try to give you an example of a carom shot. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is a carom shot. And I'm going to show you various applications of that shot. Now, I cued the cue ball slightly above center to keep it from scratching. With that same shot, if I'd have hit it dead center, it would have scratched. So you control your cue ball on that shot by whether you hit it above center, in the center, or below center. I'm going to demonstrate the difference. Firstly, I'm going to use the same shot, hitting it above center, and I'm going to shoot easy. Now you will notice that the cue ball was heading for this part of the cushion. Now I'm going to take the same shot, shoot the same shot a little bit harder. The cue ball, ladies and gentlemen, instead of hitting here like it did when I shot easy, it hit down here. Now, if I were to put the balls in the same place here and shoot even harder yet, I'm going to hit the cue ball in the same place again, above center, and let's see what happens. You will notice that the cue ball went even farther down on the cushion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if I hit the cue ball in the center with the same shot, rather than above center, I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to shoot easy, and I'm going to hit the cue ball dead center. Here again, you will see where the cue ball hits the cushion. Now I'm going to hit the cue ball harder, and I'm going to hit it dead center, and let's see what happens to the cue ball. As you can see, the cue ball scratches when you hit it dead center and shoot hard. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to shoot the same shot, except this time we're going to shoot it with a hard stroke. And you will observe that the cue ball comes to this side of the pocket. Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to show you now what happens when you shoot a medium, easy, and hard stroke using a draw stroke, hitting it below center. So firstly, we're going to demonstrate an easy stroke, cueing the cue ball below center. You will see the cue ball is headed about here. Now we're going to shoot the same stroke with about a medium stroke. And you will observe that the cue ball comes to the pocket. We're going to shoot the third shot now with a hard stroke. You will observe that the cue ball comes back up this way. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the importance of knowing that information is when you're playing pool and you're wanting to get position on other shots. So you'll need to practice hitting it high, soft, medium, and hard, hitting it in the center, soft, medium, and hard, and hitting it below center, soft, medium, and hard. Always place your cue ball and the ball in the same positions when you practice, and this way you can get an idea of how the cue ball travels at different directions when you shoot each of those shots. Now, ladies and gentlemen, your next lesson is your throw shot lesson. You know, many times while you're practicing pocket billiards, you will come across situations in which the two balls are frozen together. Many young players in the billiard establishments don't know how to make the shot or even if it can be made. But ladies and gentlemen, there is a way that a frozen ball can be made. I'm going to try to demonstrate a couple of those methods. Number one, if these two balls were frozen together and aimed to miss on the right-hand side, there are two ways that you can actually make the 4-ball. One, of course, is by cueing the cue ball with right-hand English to throw the 4 to the left. But you will notice that the cue ball goes this way, around this way. There are times when you need the cue ball to go the opposite direction after you hit your object ball. So there is another method that you can use. This then is called the throw shot. The 7 is aimed to miss right here. You would come over at this angle, and you do not need to cue your cue ball with any English, just hit it dead center. And that 7 ball actually will go in the pocket. And your cue ball has ended up on this side of the table where you want it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there are other types of throw shots that you need to learn. Many times you're going to come up against this situation. These 2 balls are frozen together. The 9 ball happens to be aimed to miss right over here. If these 2 balls were separated, of course you would need to hit the 1 ball on this side to cut the 9 to the left into the pocket. But when the 2 balls are together, they become as 1 ball. So if this were 1 big ball and I needed to cut it that way, I would have, to the left in other words, I would have to hit this big ball on the right-hand side. And since from a molecular point of view it is as 1 object, you need then to hit the 1 on this side. So we're going to do that, and let's see what happens to the 9 ball. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the only ball that counts is the 3rd ball back. In other words, this is the 1st ball, this is the 2nd ball. Your cue ball would be the 3rd ball. So here's the way to remember it. If the 1st ball is aimed to miss on the right side of the pocket, you must hit the 2nd ball on the right side. If the 1st ball is aimed to miss on your left side of the pocket, you must hit the 2nd ball back on the left side. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't matter how many balls are behind that 3rd ball. In other words, if this 6th ball is aimed to miss on the right side, we already know you must hit the 1 on the right side. But let's say that there is another ball sitting here, another one here, and another one here. And your cue ball is here. You might say, well, which ball do I have to hit to make the 6 go to the left? You can hit any one of them. It doesn't matter. You can hit the 8, 3, or the 2, because the only ball that really counts is the 3rd ball back, 1, 2, 3. And it is sitting on the correct side, so we know that the shot can be made. So we're going to shoot into the 3 ball, and let's keep our eye on the 6. The 6 ball went right into the pocket, as you can see. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you will practice throw shots, you're going to come across many situations in which they can really be of benefit to you. Another example of a throw shot is when you are close to a cushion. In other words, I'm going to move down to this side of the table, and I'm going to aim the 2-ball to miss. I'm going to place another ball right here. Now the 2-ball, I'm going to aim to miss on this side. We know if we hit the 1 ball on this side into the 8, it will cause the 2 to go farther to the left, you see, and it's already aimed to miss, so it would miss even farther. But there's still a way that you can make the 2-ball, and that's by, if this were the cue ball, that's by coming behind it into the cushion and then back into the 8, which is on the correct side. So I'm going to come in behind the 8-ball and shoot into it, and the 2-ball goes into the pocket, you see. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at this time we're going to discuss one example of an on-shot. An on-shot, ladies and gentlemen, is when 2 or more balls are situated in a certain way that makes it actually difficult to miss. It's a very easy shot. An example of that is this shot here. The 2 balls, the center line would be right here, like this. A 90-degree angle going through the 2 balls connects with the pocket. This means, ladies and gentlemen, that I can hit the 2-ball anywhere from here all the way around to here. The cue ball itself can be in any position around here, and you're still going to make the 2-ball, even if you just hit it any place. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you. It's a very easy shot. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is an on shot. Now, it has been said or written in many books that if it is off a little bit, that it can't be made. But ladies and gentlemen, there is a way that you can make it. The center line between the 2 balls in this case is aimed to miss right here. By cueing the cue ball below center, I can throw both balls forward a little bit before the 5 heads for the pocket. Let's see if we can demonstrate that. Now, that is an example how you can actually cheat on an on shot that is off. The next lesson, ladies and gentlemen, is the along the cushion lesson. You know, one of the toughest shots in pool is when the object ball is either touching or very close to a cushion. A good example would be this shot here. The ball is actually touching the cushion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, many players have read that you should try to hit the cushion and the object ball at exactly the same time. But there's a little better method of making the 9-ball, and that's to mentally move the rail back about a foot, just in your mind's eye. And simply cut the 9-ball into the pocket like you would shoot any other ball. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this next along the cushion shot comes in very handy, especially a 9-ball. I must hit the smallest ball on the table first. In this particular case, it's the 3-ball. But you will notice that I cannot cut the 3 into the 9 because I would hit the 7 first. I can't come off of the other side of the 3 with the cue ball because I would hit the 4 first. There is a way, however, that the shot can be made. And what we're going to do is hit directly into the 3 ball. We're going to cue the cue ball with high right hand English between 1 and 2 o'clock. And we have to shoot rather hard on this shot. The right English causes the cue ball to spin counterclockwise. So after it knocks the 3 out of the way, the counterclockwise spin remains on the cue ball, and that makes it stick to the cushion. So we're going to try to make the cue ball stick to the cushion and go over and make the 9 ball. Now, ladies and gentlemen, another along the cushion shot is the situation we have here. I cannot hit the 2 into the 9 because the 3 ball is blocking the path. Most players would try what we call a 3-ball combination. They would try to cut the 2 into the 3 and have the 3 make the 9. But ladies and gentlemen, that's the hard way. There is an easier way to make the shot by hitting directly into the 2 ball. We're going to kick the 3 out to the right. The 2 will carry off the 3 into the cushion. The cushion will push it out the same way, which leaves an open path for the cue ball. So we're going to call the cue ball into the 9. You know, ladies and gentlemen, one of the beautiful things about pocket billiards is the fact that you have to use science, or you can use science in many cases to determine a shot. A good example of that would be a little physics shot that I'm going to show you. We're going to use a simple law of physics. This law of physics says for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. Now, ladies and gentlemen, these balls weigh 6 ounces apiece. So with the line of balls situated as they are, close together, if I want to make the 1 ball, all I do is pull back 1 ball, 6 ounces, and only 6 ounces will go off of the other end. Now, if I want to make 2 balls, these 2 here, that's 12 ounces. So I would pull back 12 ounces off of the other end, and only the 8 and 2 will go. Now, if I want to make 3 balls, that's 18 ounces. That's the 5, 3, and 6. I would pull 18 ounces back off of this end. And now 18 ounces will go off of the other end, you see. So there's a simple law of physics that we can utilize to determine whether or not balls will go in a cluster. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you at this time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, a good example of the last shot would be this one. The 8 ball is on the spot. And as you can see, there's 6 ounces blocking the 8. On this side of the 8, there's 24 ounces. Most players, if they had a similar situation, would have no idea that the 8 ball actually could be made in this pocket because the 6 is in the way. But now that we know that last law of physics, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, we know that if we hit into the 8, it will knock this 6 ounces out of the way because the cue ball only weighs 6 ounces. It will knock this 6 ounces out of the way because the cue ball only weighs 6 ounces. It will also knock 6 ounces off of the other end. That still leaves 18 ounces to hold the 8 in line to go into the corner pocket. We're going to call the 8 ball in the left corner pocket. And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, an example of how you can use the last shot in a real game of pool is when you have a cluster of balls. Many times, the only place that a person looks to make a ball is in the outer perimeter of that cluster. But if you'll remember the last shot, many times you'll see a ball that can be made from the inner part of a cluster, such as this cluster here. You see, ladies and gentlemen, I cannot make the 6 ball off of the 4 because it's aimed to miss. The 9 ball would hit the edge of the 6 and bounce out here. I cannot make the 7 off of the 1 because it would hit down in here. The most unlikely ball, I believe, to make, as far as it looks, is the 8 ball. But here again, we have the same principle. There's only 6 ounces in front of the 8, and there's more weight on the other side. So if I shoot into the 8, hopefully it'll knock the 6 ounces out of the way, and the 8 can be made in the side pocket. So we're going to call the 8 in the side pocket. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you a system that you can use in banking a ball across the table. I would like to mention one thing, however. You never use a bank shot if you can cut a ball into the pocket. So on a shot similar to this, it is much better to try to cut the ball, actually, than it is to bank it. But there is a particular system you can use. Your first line is to make a line going through the center of the 7 ball. This line must be parallel with this short cushion. Your second line goes from that point into the pocket in which you want to make it. Your third line, ladies and gentlemen, cuts the 7 ball into the opposite pocket. Now, where these 2 lines cross would be right here. So your fourth and last line then goes right straight across the table through that particular cross. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all you need to do is cause the 7 ball to hit in front of the chalk. And if you do that, it should go in this pocket. The hardest part, frankly, is to get the 7 to hit in front of the chalk. So we're going to give it a try here. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's important that you have no English on the cue ball to make that shot. Otherwise, it will either go short or long. It's also important that you hit directly in front of the chalk, because if you aim through the chalk, you're going to hit on this side and miss the pocket here. If you hit on the other side of the chalk, of course, you're going to hit here. You must hit directly in front of the chalk.